Welcome to the Sterile Environment Podcast. This week's episode for spooky season is sponsored by Chad Chatty's Spooky House.
This is the story of a man who had a rather unusual experience with a haunted rubber duck. We know it's obscure, but the story, whether true or not, is sure to get you in the mood for this upcoming time for fright. He put the duck up on eBay and sold it for $107 in 2004.
This is the man's personal experience. No photos are available online of this product anymore. Prepare.
This is a crazy story that I wouldn't have believed had it not happened to me. I am not prone to or drawn to the supernatural, and I in fact have a strong Christian support system. But what I experienced has no other explanation than the unexplained. This is a true story about a rubber duck. I don't feel that in good conscience I can keep this thing in my house. It wouldn't be fair to my family, and frankly, I've lost enough sleep over it as it is. I spoke at length with my pastor, and together we came up into the idea to sell it with full disclosure, any other method, and we would risk the duck falling into unsuspecting hands. We knew that the only way to get rid of him without personal condemnation was to be open, honest, and forthright. We knew the person getting the duck would have to know the whole story and accept the consequences freely. We felt the only way to do this was to be sure the story would be read, understood, and accepted. So here it is. My son, now 2, received this rubber ducky as a gift from an aunt when he was approximately 10 or 11 months old. He was very enthusiastic about his bath time and loved the new addition to the tub. He named the duck Yella, his personal pronunciation of yellow, and of course the color of the duck. Now, as with most kids, their tastes change and can be at times fickle. In fact, suggesting that all kids have some little of ADD would not be a stretch. Soon, Yella had lost some of his appeal in the eyes of my son. He requested the duck's company less and less as time wore on, until such time where Yella was all but forgotten.
We originally thought nothing of it. Then, as time went on, my son began to speak more and was able to articulate his thoughts. He started referring more and more to his old friend Yella. The problem was that it wasn't in a positive or childish manner. In fact, it was really quite disturbing. He repeatedly made reference to fights Yella had inflicted on the left side of the duck's head. At first, we just figured he had an active imagination and that eventually he would forget about Yella. But he never did. In fact, each time he told the story, he did it with more detail and more emotion, until his mother and I finally forbade him from telling the story at all. In fact, my wife was so distressed, she searched out the duck and vowed to dispose of it. At this point, our son had an unnerving attachment to Yella. He would never let the duck out of his sight. He was never affectionate towards the duck. He just insisted that the toy always be around him, no matter what. He was about 1.5 years old, and there was certainly no bargaining with him. Every time he tried to take the toy, our son would lose it, literally crying bloody murder. Needless to say, there was no way of coaxing the duck away, and despite our best efforts, the stories continued. We hoped and prayed that his obsession with Yella would pass with time. We even found ourselves spoiling him in an effort to replace the duck. It was useless.
That was really good. Page 2, top. One night, our son and Yella were having a bath together, with several of the other bath toys collected over the course of the previous year. There was a boat, a whale, a starfish, a small action figure, and some miscellaneous plastic tools. Our son's overall interest in Yella had dwindled to the point of sheer indifference. In fact, if he had had his way, the duck wouldn't have even been in the tub. Instead, it was because of his mother's lapse in judgment that Yella was included at all. He went about playing and splashing with other toys, all the while ignoring the duck, intentionally or not. It's at this point our son noticed the other toys in the tub changing shape, distorting, and losing their color into the water. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew something wasn't right. He also noticed that Yella was eerily positioned at the end of the tub, dead center, and facing him directly. He also noticed the duck's shape hadn't changed, and his color appeared to be as bright as ever. It seemed as though the toys were melting before him. It was at this point that he reached out to grab the duck, almost mesmerized by his yellow body. As he grabbed the duck, he felt piercing pain in the palm of his hand and immediately threw the toy back into the water. He was sure he'd been bitten. Anger flooded our son, and again he grabbed at Yella, and this time he wasted no time in throwing the duck across the room. The duck crashed against the raised corner of the toilet paper holder, bounced off the wall, and came to rest at my feet, as I now stood in the doorway of the bathroom. By now, my wife was aware of our son's rage and the events taking place. She threw down her magazine, jumped off her stool, and lunged across the washroom towards our son. She scooped him up into her arms. My wife and I looked at each other as we tried desperately to process the evidence before us. All the while, our little one cried and shouted at the rubber ducky on the floor.
Read the short one too if you want.
Page 2, bottom.
As I mentioned before, if it had not happened to us, I would have never given it a second thought, and I certainly would have dismissed the author as a quack and the story as a farce. We immediately checked the temperature of the water. It was lukewarm. We searched the bathroom high and low for chemicals or agents which may have caused this reaction in the toys. Nothing was found. Our son was not burned, and with the exception of a spot on the palm of his hand, there was no sign of injury. Being cautious, we packed our son in the car and headed for the emergency room. As expected, nothing was found to be abnormal. We then rushed to the home of our pastor. We've never been fanatical with respect to our religious beliefs, but we felt like there was something unholy and unexplainable here that needed to be addressed. Our pastor assured us that there had to be an earthly explanation, but at the same time, he had an unsettled look that left us feeling doubtful.
We left and headed home, exhausted and anxious to pull this night behind us. At home, we rushed upstairs to our son's room, got him into his pajamas, and said our goodnight prayers. Our son seemed distant and agitated, but soon relented to his own exhaustion. My wife and I returned downstairs to the main floor bathroom and the scene of this evening's event. Everything was as we left it, with one exception. Yellow was back in the tub, dead center, and facing us directly. We looked at each other in the hope that the other would appear calm and composed. It didn't happen. Instead, we stared at each other, waiting for an acknowledgement of who would put the duck back in the tub. That didn't happen either. I immediately grabbed up the duck and without hesitation placed him in the closest container I could find, a Tupperware-style container on the counter in the kitchen. I then stormed out to the garage and tossed the container on the workbench, run back in the house to try and comprehend what had just happened. It was at this point I picked up the phone and called our pastor, and how we could find ourselves in the position we are today.
I can't explain what happened, and the sooner I can put the events of that night and this duck behind me, the better off I'll be.
I will not be responsible for the duck after shipping. I will not field questions or help to explain its unusual mystique. I want nothing to do with it. The winning bidder must understand this. I don't want someone to find this thing in a dumpster or buy it at a garage sale. I want the person who gets it to understand what they have and not to take it lightly. For God's sake, I don't want it near children. I'd be just as happy if you buried it in the Tupperware container it's still in.
I hope you respect my wishes.
And that's this week's story. Thank you to
Chad Chatty's Spooky House for sponsoring this episode of the podcast.
And remember to keep your environment sterile.
A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. That area had no streetlights, so it was very dark, especially if there weren't clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights.
I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I had never smelled that before around that house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just got off a shift a few hours of overtime, and I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night.
I woke up sometime later, sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away, because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He'd always text me to let me know beforehand, though, and I hadn't heard my phone gone off.
I reached over my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9-something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not.
I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name.
Nathan?
There were a couple seconds of silence before I heard loud footsteps as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt up out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already upstairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside.
The house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in, and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway, past my door, and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up.
I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside of the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back into the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I printed my miniature models. I guess I decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom, because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open.
I was crouched in my attic, just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see from about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies.
The man in my house ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I was certain I couldn't climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noise had stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police.
The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over, I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by my bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs.
Hello? Police?
The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along the fence line with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often used to smoke meth, so they think he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible.
I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at that house, so I lived there another 3 years without incident.
One precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hall first.
I didn't want to go to school today. I told Mom my stomach hurt, but she just said, Nice try, Tyler. You're not getting out of maths. She didn't understand. No one did. Not even my best friend, Emily. Not even my teacher, Mr. Harris. Though, I thought maybe he was the one person who'd listen if I told him. It all started 2 months ago. Back then, I loved social media. Instagram especially. I posted pictures of my cat Benji and selfies with silly little filters. My account was private, and Mom always told me to be careful, so I never added people I didn't know. But one day, I got a follow request from someone named Smart Schoolboy 9. His profile picture was a boy in a school uniform. I wouldn't have accepted, but his bio did say he was from the UK, and I remember talking to a boy in a Minecraft server who said he lived there, so maybe I thought it was him. At first, he just liked my pictures. Nothing weird about that, right? He commented sometimes too.
Cute cut.
Or,
Nice drawing.
felt kinda nice having another follower who liked my stuff, even though I didn't know him that well. But then, things got strange. One day, I posted a picture of the park where me and my best friend Emily always hung out after school. We were sitting by the big oak tree, laughing. I took a selfie. The comment almost came instantly.
I see you by the tree.
I laughed it off. I mean, it was just a picture, and anyone could have guessed we were still sitting there. But when I turned around, there was no one. Just the wind and leaves and Emily giggling as she scrolled through her phone. I didn't tell her about the comment. I didn't want her to think I was being silly. The next time, it was worse. I posted a picture of my bedroom. Nothing special. Just Benji on my bed, looking cute as usual. Then the comment came again.
Your bed looks comfy. Can I come over?
I felt cold all over. How did he know what my room looked like? I hadn't posted any pictures of it before. My heart pounded, and I blocked him right away, but that didn't stop the feeling. I started noticing shadows outside of my window at night, like someone who, pretending to be a schoolboy, was standing under a street lamp, just outside our house. I told Mom, but she said it was probably just the neighbor's son coming home late from his job. That didn't stop the nightmares, though. Every night I dreamed of a schoolboy with no face standing outside, staring at me. I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew he was watching me. Always. One day at school, we had a substitute teacher. He was tall and thin, but he had a huge gut, with dark hair and glasses, and he had high-heeled leather boots. Kind of peculiar. He smiled at us when he introduced himself. "You can call me Mr. Jones," he said. But something about him felt wrong. His eyes were cold, like he wasn't really looking at us. He was looking right through us. During lunch, I went to the bathroom and heard myself. I didn't mean to hear it myself, but I overheard some teachers talking in the hallway. "I don't know who this Mr. Jones is," one of them said. "I've never seen him before. He just showed up today." My stomach flipped. I thought about the Instagram account. Smart Schoolboy 9. Was it just a coincidence? Or was this Mr. Jones him? I rushed back to class, my hands shaking, trying to tell myself I was just being paranoid. But when I got back, he was at my desk, looking at my sketchbook. "These are good," he said, smiling in that cold, empty way. "Do you draw at home?" I couldn't breathe. He knew. He knew about my drawings, my room, my life. I didn't answer him, and he just walked away like nothing happened. After school, I walked home with Emily the whole time. I felt like someone was watching us. I kept looking over my shoulder, but no one was there. Just the trees, the cars, the usual. but the feeling wouldn't go away. When I got home, I ran upstairs, slammed my bedroom door, and grabbed my phone, and opened up my Instagram account, and looked at my block list. Smart Schoolboy 9 was still there, blocked. I felt a little better, knowing that he couldn't see my posts anymore. But then, a new notification popped up. It was a DM from someone named Mr. Jones 9. See you tomorrow. I screamed. I threw my phone across the room. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. I ran downstairs, breathless, but before I told anything, my mom hung up the phone. Tyler? That was the school. They said Mr. Jones wasn't supposed to be there today. They don't know who he is. My blood turned to ice. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, standing outside my window, smiling. Next day, I didn't want to go to school. I told Mom my stomach hurt, but she didn't believe me. She dropped me off, and I tried to blend in with the other kids, but I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to appear. And then, during recess, I saw him, standing behind the fence, just beyond the playground. He was dressed in a school uniform, same black heeled boots, his hair flapping in the wind, and he waved at me. I ran inside, my heart pounding, and I ran straight to Mr. Harris, pulling on his sleeve. "He's here!" I gasped. "He was watching me." Mr. Harris frowned, looking out the window. "There's no one there, Tyler." But I knew he was wrong. I knew it. I could feel him waiting for me. Watching. Always watching. And I don't know how to stop him.
It was 11 p.m. at night. Two children, Tommy and Savannah, were left home alone as their dad was out at a work dinner. Although both of them were old enough to be left home alone, that childlike sense of fear never really left. As Savannah got ready for bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She started to close her curtains when her breath caught in her throat.
Oh my God.
She could barely make out the figure outside. Hidden in the shadows was a tall man. She squinted her eyes to make out any details, but it was just too far to see anything beside its silhouette. She realized with terror that it could see her too. Her shaking hands grabbed her phone from her pocket and dialed a number, trying not to take her eyes off the figure.
Hello?
Dad, there's a man outside.
A man? Are you sure? Where are you seeing this?
He's outside my window. He's like tall. I can't make out any features. He's covered in the shadows.
Okay, just breathe. Can you see his face?
I think he's wearing a mask.
What kind?
It looks like a bag, and there's chains holding it. I'm not sure.
A chain? Okay, Savannah, listen to me closely. Whatever you do, don't look away.
What? Are you not going to call the police?
This isn't a matter the police can help with. I'm on my way. Just promise me you won't look away.
Okay, I promise.
Thank you. I'll be there soon, sweetie.
Savannah watched the man in the shadows. She felt her heartbeat rise and her breath quicken. She did not want to be alone, so she called her brother down.
Tommy!
What?
Get down here!
Ugh, what do you want?
Can you see it too?
See what?
That!
What the hell?
Okay, so I'm not crazy.
Who is that?
I don't know.
Did you call Dad?
Yes, I called Dad.
Okay, don't yell.
I'm sorry, I'm just scared. I don't know why it's watching us or what that even is.
What did Dad say?
He said not to look away from it.
That's it?
He was really vague about everything, I think he's seen that thing before.
You think so?
Yeah. Tommy, did you lock all the doors?
I think so.
What do you mean you think so?
I don't remember.
Okay, keep an eye on the figure. Don't look away from it. I'm going to lock all the doors.
Why can't I do it?
Because I don't trust you.
Whatever.
As Tommy blinked, he realized the figure was gone.
Savannah!
What's wrong?
It disappeared.
What do you mean it disappeared?
As Tommy opened his mouth to explain, his mouth went dry.
What's wrong?
It's behind you.
What?
Savannah turned around and let out a scream. The figure was in her bedroom, and her eyes widened, taking in every detail. His bag had holes and dirt, with rusted chains being the only thing to keep it from revealing what was underneath. He towered over the siblings, and in the dim bedroom light, she saw his suit with large hands that came out of the sleeves. They looked human. Her eyes watered from staring at it for so long, and she felt every nerve in her body telling her to run away. But she didn't. A door slammed and footsteps echoed in the halls as their father burst into the room.
Savannah!
Dad?
As her eyes looked towards her father, the figure's hands reached towards her throat. Her father saw and grabbed a hand mirror off of her bedside table and lunged toward the figure, shoving the mirror in front of it. His hand stopped inches before Savannah and looked towards the mirror. In a few seconds, the figure became dust. The family all looked at each other, each two frozen with fear before Savannah and Tommy ran into their father's arms, crying.
It's okay, it's okay.
Is it gone?
Yes, I promise. But how did I get into your room?
We looked away and...
You what?
As Savannah's father looked at his children, he had that all too familiar feeling that they weren't alone.
A wealthy man wanted to go hunting in a part of northern Canada where few people have ever hunted. He traveled to a trading post and tried to find a guide to take him, but no one would do it. It was too dangerous, they said. Finally, he found an Indian who needed money badly, and he agreed to take him. The Indian's name was DeFago. They made camp in the snow near a large frozen lake. For 3 days they hunted, but they had nothing to show for it. The third night, a windstorm came up. They lay in their tent listening to the wind howling and the trees whipping back and forth. To see the storm better, the hunter opened the tent flap. What he saw startled him. There wasn't a breath of air stirring, and the trees were standing perfectly still. Yet he could hear the wind howling, and the more he listened, the more it sounded as if it was calling DeFago's name.
I must be losing my mind,
the hunter thought. But DeFago had gotten out of his sleeping bag. He was huddled in the corner of his tent, his head buried in his arms.
What's this all about?
The hunter asked. It's nothing, DeFago said. But the wind continued to call him, and DeFago became more tense and more restless. Suddenly, he jumped to his feet, and he began to run from the tent, but the hunter grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground.
You can't leave me out here,
the hunter shouted. Then the wind called again. DeFago broke loose and ran into the darkness. The hunter could hear him screaming as he went. Again and again he cried, then his voice faded away, and the wind died down. At daybreak, the hunter followed DeFago's tracks in the snow. They went through the woods, down toward the lake, then out onto the ice. But soon he noticed something strange. The steps DeFago had taken gotten longer and longer. They were so long, no human being could have taken them. It was as if something had helped him to hurry away. The hunter followed the tracks out to the middle of the lake, but there they disappeared. At first, he thought that DeFago had fallen through the ice, but there wasn't any hole. Then he thought something had pulled him out of the ice into the sky, but that made no sense. As he stood wondering what had happened, the wind picked up again. Soon it was howling as it had the night before. Then he heard DeFago's voice. It was coming from up above, and again he heard DeFago screaming. Now the hunter wanted to leave that place as fast as he could. He went back to the camp and packed, and he left some food for DeFago when he started out. Weeks later he reached civilization. The following year he went back to hunt in that area again. He went to the same trading post to look for a guide. The people there could not explain what had happened to DeFago that night.
but they hadn't seen him since. "Maybe it was the Windigo," one of them said, and he laughed. "It's supposed to come with the wind. It drags you along at great speed until your feet are burned away, and more of you than that. Then it carries you into the sky and it drops you. It's just a crazy story, but that's what some of the Indians say." A few days later, the hunter was at the trading post again. An Indian came in and sat by the fire. He had a blanket wrapped around him, and he wore his hat so that you couldn't see his face. The hunter thought there was something familiar about him. He walked over and asked,
Are you the Fago?
The Indian didn't answer.
Do you know anything about him?
No answer. He began to wonder if something was wrong, if the man needed help, but he couldn't see his face.
Are you alright?
He asked. No answer. To get a good look at him, he lifted the Indian's hat. Then he screamed. There was nothing under the hat but a pile of ashes.